The transport ship did not slow down when they pushed her out. It simply adjusted its trajectory, as if shedding excess weight improved efficiency, which was apparently the lesson she was meant to learn. She lay still for a while, counting heartbeats and listening to the wind argue with the rocks. Her ears rang, then twitched, then flattened in irritation. Alive. Inconveniently so. She sat up, brushed dust from her palms, and muttered that if abandonment was meant to be instructional, the curriculum lacked clarity. The beacon they left behind blinked once and died. She laughed, a short sound that surprised her. Even their cruelty was poorly maintained. By the time the sun dipped low enough to stain the horizon metallic orange, she had discovered 3 things. The planet was not immediately lethal, the local drones were aggressively curious, and she was very tired of being evaluated by machines that asked for citizenship codes she no longer possessed. She waved at one drone until it retreated, offended, and informed it that she had been officially declared worthless, so it could save the paperwork. The shelter appeared as a shadow stitched together from scrap and stubbornness. It hummed, coughed, then hummed again. She approached carefully, rehearsing several dignified requests for help and one undignified plan involving theft. The door opened before she could knock. The human stared at her as if she were a system error. She stared back, noting that he smelled faintly of ozone and burnt protein paste. Neither of them spoke. Finally he said, "You're not a raccoon." She considered this. "I am having a very bad day," she replied. He stepped aside. "That tracks. Come in before the perimeter sensor decides you're hostile. It's wrong a lot, but it's enthusiastic." Inside, things beeped for no clear reason. A heater glowed, dimmed, then glowed again in what seemed like a personal struggle. She stood uncertainly, waiting for questions about her species, her value, her usefulness. Instead, he handed her a cup. It sloshed. "It's warm," he said. "Technically." She drank. Tasted like regret and minerals. "You live here alone?" "Mostly," he said. "Sometimes the drones visit. They're bad conversationalists." Silence settled, not heavy, just unfamiliar. Her ears twitched again. He noticed but didn't ask. That felt stranger than interrogation. Later, when night pressed against the walls and the wind tried to listen in, she curled near the heater. He adjusted a panel, then another, then gave up and kicked it lightly. The heater responded with a satisfied hum. She smiled despite herself. "They threw me away," she said, not looking at him. He nodded, as if she'd told him the weather. "Yeah, systems do that. I got thrown out too. Different reasons. Similar enthusiasm." She glanced at him then, really looked. He met her gaze without curiosity sharp enough to cut. Outside, a distant engine roared and faded. No rescue, no pursuit, just the quiet. When she slept, she dreamed of long corridors and closed doors. When she woke, the shelter was still there. So was the human, arguing with a machine that insisted on calling him unauthorized presence. For the first time since the hatch opened and the sky rushed in, she felt something loosen inside her. Not hope, something sturdier. ChatGPT hata yapabalar. Onemli Bilgillery Control Eden. Morning arrived without asking permission. The shelter's main console announced it at full volume, mispronouncing the local stellar cycle and congratulating itself for accuracy. The human groaned and tried to silence it by placing a cup over the speaker. The console declared this an act of rebellion and threatened a diagnostic. She sat up, ears flicking at the noise before she remembered they were no longer monitored. That realization felt good enough to smile about. The human noticed and said, "If you're thinking of smashing it, get in line." They shared the remains of a meal that required stirring and forgiveness. He called it breakfast. She called it an experiment. The console called it nutritionally optimistic. Afterward, she followed him through tasks that seemed improvised but effective. Resetting shields that thought dust was an invasion, coaxing water from a recycler that preferred to sulk, and teaching a patrol drone that the word resident could apply to more than one being. When the drone scanned her and paused, she held her breath. It asked for a designation. she said, temporarily alive. The drone accepted this and moved on. She laughed, surprised at the sound. The human grinned like he'd won a small war. Later, a pain flared along her side where old injuries remembered themselves. He offered a med patch. She hesitated, then agreed. The patch chirped, displayed a list of incompatible biologies, and suggested a prayer. He peeled it off and apologized. She told him her people had better tech but worse manners. He said that sounded familiar. They worked side by side until the sun climbed and fell again. She learned his name only after the shelter asked him to confirm ownership, and he argued with it for 10 minutes. He learned hers when a translation glitch rendered it as statistical error, which he found charming. She did not correct him right away. At night, signals brushed the edge of the shelter's range. Old codes. Her codes. She stiffened. He noticed and pretended not to. Instead, he told a story about how the shelter used to belong to a corporate outpost that abandoned it after deciding profits were allergic to this planet. She snorted. "They're not wrong," she said, and felt steadier. A probe swept low. Alarms tried to start. He unplugged them. They sat in the dark, counting seconds. The probe passed. When the lights returned, he offered her a tool and asked if she wanted to help reinforce the perimeter. She took it without ceremony. As they worked, she spoke of her people's rankings, the way worth was measured in output and silence. He listened, occasionally interrupting to complain about the shelter's refusal to accept new parameters. Humor crept in, not loud, just enough to keep the edges from cutting. When they finished, she realized she hadn't once thought about surviving alone that day. The shelter recognized her presence and stopped calling her an anomaly. Felt like a small victory. She slept with the heater humming and the console sulking, and when she dreamed, the doors stayed open. The signal arrived politely, which somehow made it worse. The console announced an incoming transmission, flagged it as former affiliates, and suggested a tone of cooperation. She stared at the flickering display, ears pulled tight, then relaxed them on purpose. The human leaned back in his chair and said, "If they're here to apologize, tell them to bring snacks." The message unfolded in familiar cadences, full of calibrated regret and legal softness. They acknowledged an error. They requested her return. They promised reassessment. She laughed, a sound that startled even her. Reassessment, she said, was a long word for being wrong. Outside, a sleek retrieval craft settled like it owned the ground. Automated voices called her designation. The human stood, stretched, and asked the shelter if it felt like hosting a standoff. The shelter responded by locking the door and playing an old warning jingle. He nodded approvingly. They came closer. Drones hovered. A probe extended a scanner that lingered on her ears as if trying to remember why they mattered. She felt the old instinct to shrink, to be efficient and quiet. Instead, she stepped forward and told them no. She said she had shelter. She said she had work. She said she was not available for being thrown away again. The probe recalculated. The drones hesitated. The human whispered that this was his favorite part of negotiations. Right before things got awkward, she smiled and activated the perimeter upgrade they'd built together, the one powered by stubbornness and spare parts. The drones backed off, offended. The retrieval craft lifted, leaving behind a message about future consequences. She waved. When the dust settled, the console chimed and updated her status to resident. It asked if she'd like to register a second name. She chose one. Felt like claiming space. Days folded into each other. She repaired what she could, improved what she understood, and ignored what she didn't. Her people sent nothing more. The probes stopped coming. The shelter stopped sulking. The human admitted he liked the quiet. She admitted she liked the noise he made when machines refused to cooperate. One evening, as stars stitched themselves into patterns she no longer tried to decode, she realized she was standing taller. Not because she'd been proven valuable by any measure that mattered to her former people, but because she'd stopped measuring herself that way. The human noticed and said, "You look taller." She flicked an ear at him. "Perspective," she said. They watched the horizon glow and fade. Somewhere, systems continued to sort and discard. Here, a heater hummed, a console behaved, and two beings shared shelter without asking what it was worth. She thought of the day she'd been pushed out into the wind and felt something close, finally, to gratitude.